And welcome to College Football Tradition, a history of American college football. I'm Brian Partika, joined alongside Jacob Vanderford, my co-host and bro-host for the 1872 season. We finally get back into full swing after the hiatus in 1871, where no games were played. But now we get to 1872, and we now have five total teams. So Rutgers and Princeton and Columbia, they were already there. Now we introduce Yale, who we are going to be talking about a lot as the decade progresses. And we're also going to talk about Stevens, the Institute of Technology. It's a current Division III school in Hoboken, New Jersey, but they are part of a huge history of the beginning of the sport. And certainly this year. But as we talk about this 1872 season, some of the marquee games that happened, Princeton beat Rutgers 4-1, and Yale beat Columbia 3-0. And that was in front of a crowd of apparently around 400 people at that Yale-Columbia game. So we started to see attendance numbers getting recorded, basically, at some of these games. And we'll see that that number gradually increases over the 1800s as more people become interested in the sport. But they estimate around 400 people attended that Yale versus Columbia game. So Princeton and Yale both finished the year 1-0. They did not play any other games. Rutgers was also notably, playing in a decent amount of games. They went 1-1-1 on the year. So they tied Columbia, then they beat Columbia, then they lost to obviously Princeton. So when you're comparing the strength of schedule between Princeton and Yale, the two teams that were claimed national champions, that were retroactively named national champions, it's clear that Princeton beat the tougher opponent in Rutgers because Rutgers beat Columbia, who was Yale's opponent. So if you're going off strength of schedule, Princeton had a tougher opponent, I guess you could say, since Rutgers was 1-0-1 against Columbia, who was Yale's opponent. But either way, both teams finished 1-0. And then at the end of it, Princeton did want to extend an invitation to Yale. They extended an invitation to Yale to play, and both programs they did not play a game that year, despite the invitation being sent out, but those games would eventually take place during the 1870s and decide a lot of retroactive national champions. Jacob, what are your thoughts on the 1872 season and as some more games started to progress after the hiatus in 71?
It's so interesting to me, like with the claim national championships, how that started so early as well. Like we're looking here, like in 1872, there's Princeton and Yale. They have like the same record. As we kind of talked about, Princeton probably beat the better opponent in Rutgers. Rutgers had the one tie, so that kind of took them out of it. Columbia, obviously. Yale beat them, and so yeah, it's the 1-0 records. It's so interesting, like how throughout history, throughout college football, we'll talk about it as we move on through the series. But the claimed national championships, who thinks that they had the better record, who had the better who had the better like strength of schedule and all of those things. So interesting to see that started this early on. You also start seeing there in 1872, the Yale Football Association is formed. I talked about in the last episode of the series, that the Princeton Football Association was formed. Like we kind of talked about, like, starting in Britain, there were like rugby, soccer associations. Now we're starting to see the formation of what could be NCAA. Obviously now we have like NFL and things like that are beyond college football. So it's this forming and blossoming of association and committees. Some of those rules that Yale was coming up with, and this is so interesting because Princeton, like we talked about the last episode, they had different rules than Yale's rules, and so how do we kind of juxtapose and figure out like whose rules are we playing with? And typically, like we've kind of found out, it's kind of comes down to like who has the home field and all those things. So
Yeah, or they would decide before the game. Like right before the game, they would meet and be like, "Hey, we want to do this, you want to do that. Let's make some compromises here and there." But you're so right. It was about the home team in a lot of situations.
And that's so weird. I'm
Yeah.
like, shouldn't you have more time to prepare? I don't know. Today we have like walkthroughs. You can watch film. You can, think about like different strategies and things like that ahead of time, playbooks, all of those things. But they just showed up and talked about the rules, and then they went for it, which is so odd to me. But so in the Yale Association rules, like you had 20 players to a side instead of 25 earlier on with Princeton. Goalposts were eight paces apart. 8 paces? What does that even
Yeah.
mean? Is that seems so like depending on your foot size, like how long your stride is, like what, like there's no like true dimension to that, I feel like. And then in a game, and the 5 of the 9 goals are necessary. Earlier on, it was 4 of 7. Um, what is this one? When the ball is caught in the air, an adversary may strike it from the hands of the player catching it. So what? Is that a fumble? Is that the first introduction of the fumble? Like I don't understand.
I think
So
that we were getting into the strips and the fumbles at this time, because kind of like, it was a simulation to kind of rugby a little bit. So there were kind of things like that. I wish we could see film of some of these
yeah,
games. I would love to watch the Princeton Rutgers 1872 matchup. Like, I would
if
just
we could overlay our podcast with the film and we were just like deconstructing that would be sick.
That would be really awesome. I would just love to see some of the things, because when they talk about these rules in these articles or these university archives, you could kind of tell what the game looked like, but there are a lot of things that you really can't tell what it looked like. And certainly, with a lot of these games as well, there were no lights, so you were also playing probably in the mid-afternoon. But if it got late, the game was it was just over. That was it. The game would just end. And something else about, this year of college football, we're now in the fourth year of the sport. Nobody's won on the road yet. Everybody keeps winning at home. Rutgers, when they t went to Columbia and tied them, that was pretty much the first time anybody who has come out kind of successful when traveling to an opponent. But I also want to shout out Columbia here because we're going to be talking about them a little bit more. They are one of the first, programs to really travel and want to play a bunch of teams. And there's not real reason why we think that might be, but they're located in New York, Columbia is, so they're pretty central to a lot of the programs that are popping up. And we'll see that they are playing a lot more games during the 1870s than Yale and Princeton, and eventually Harvard as well. So shout out to Columbia, the Lions, for just taking the lead on playing a lot of college games.
Yeah, and another thing that I saw that was weird was that this is the introduction of like referees. Like they talk about how there are 2 judges for each goal. A referee was there to dispute all differing opinions in terms of the game. And so like that, I mean, that's so interesting. Like, will we see like penalties and things like that coming into play coming up into the future? And yeah, obviously like the way that these games were decided. The 4-1, Princeton beat Rutgers, Yale beat Columbia 3-0. Like those are like field goal scores. Those are like four. That's like 2 safeties. Like it's so interesting how like the development and the of the way that things were scored. It's usually just like by a point, by like if you score a goal or not. And so I don't
Yeah.
know. All of those things are so interesting to me. And yeah, we'll see how college football changes from here.
Yeah, yeah. Teams would get into the end zone, like you said, and then they would have a chance to score a goal by kicking it through. And sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. And that's how you get those wacky scores in there, and why that looks the way it did. It'll be a couple decades before scores start looking a little similar to what they look like now. Um, but our college football tradition national champions are Princeton and Yale. They both went 1-0 against their opponents, and they both didn't play each other. But I know this is my opinion, and Jacob, feel free to share yours as well. If we had to pick one champion for 1872, I think it would be Princeton because they beat Rutgers and Rutgers beat Columbia, who was Yale's opponent. We see that Princeton has a tougher strength of opponent, of singular opponent, if you will. But obviously, we know that transitive property doesn't really work in today's college football. But really, this is all we have to go off of for 1872. So Princeton is my one true champion for that season. And also, especially since they extended an invite to Yale to play that year, and Yale did not return the favor. In wanting to play Princeton that season. They would eventually play throughout the rest of the decade, and Yale would get the best of them a few times. But this year, we got Princeton as our pick one champion.
Yeah, I want to give it to Yale so bad because it's like, oh, Princeton like has won in the first, few years of college football being around. But yeah, I agree. Like I agree that, since Princeton invited Yale to play, Yale decided not to play. that's Yale's own fault. Like they could have won and been the true champion. But Princeton, I think the strength of schedule, like we talked about, beating Rutgers. Rutgers obviously was the stronger opponent. So yeah, I got to give it to Princeton as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, this will be a really budding rivalry as it continues on throughout this decade, and we will be talking about a lot of these games, and there's a lot more detailed reports of how those games went, and there's some really key players such as Walter Camp, Woodrow Wilson, that are really going to be a part of some of these matchups moving forward. But Jacob, do you got anything else on the 1872 season before we wrap it up?
I'm all good to go.
Perfect. Well, for Jacob Vanderford, I'm Brian Partika. This is a History of American College Football. Thank you.
Peace out.